What if I told you that Rome's greatest weapon wasn't the sword, the shield, or even its legendary generals? What if the true secret behind Rome's unstoppable rise was a strategy so simple, yet so powerful, that no empire before or after ever wielded it in quite the same way? Today, we're going to uncover the single greatest reason Rome transformed from a small city on the banks of the Tiber into the most dominant empire the world had ever seen. When people think of Rome, they think of gladiators, mighty emperors, or crumbling ruins bathed in golden light. But beneath all the myths and marble lies something much more practical. Rome didn't just stumble into greatness, it engineered it. And at the heart of that engineering was a strategy that blended discipline, flexibility, and persistence in a way that no rival could match. This video is about more than just battles or conquests. It's about how Rome thought, because Rome's victories weren't only won on battlefields like Cannae, Zama, or Alesia. They were won in the minds of their leaders, in the training fields of their legions, and in the promises Rome made to conquered peoples. The central question we're exploring today is simple. What was the strategy that made Rome unstoppable? To answer it, we'll journey through 4 key pillars of Roman power. First, their unmatched adaptability in war, the way they learned from every defeat and every enemy. Second, their genius in creating the Manipular Legion system, a flexible formation that shattered the old ways of fighting. Third, the iron discipline and relentless training that turned ordinary men into living weapons. And finally, the brilliant political move of incorporating allies and conquered peoples into the Roman system, creating an empire of soldiers who didn't just fight for Rome, they became Rome. Each of these elements fed into a larger truth. Rome's real strategy wasn't about brilliance in a single moment, but about persistence across centuries. The Romans never fought for the day, they fought for forever. When you think of Rome's military strength, it's tempting to imagine sheer force of numbers or the unbreakable will of its soldiers. But the truth is far more fascinating. Rome's greatest weapon was not the sword, nor the shield, but the mind. The Romans understood that war was not static. It was a living, shifting reality. Their enemies, from the disciplined phalanxes of the Greeks to the fierce cavalry of the Gauls, often relied on a single style of warfare, deeply rooted in tradition. Rome, however, thrived on something far more flexible: adaptability. This ability to absorb, transform, and improve upon the methods of others was the reason they outlasted nearly every rival they faced. Take the early defeats against Pyrrhus of Epirus in the 3rd century BCE. The Romans had never encountered war elephants before. Their lines broke under the charge of these towering beasts, and their formations crumbled in terror. Most states would have avoided further conflict with such a terrifying foe. But Rome studied its enemy. They learned to counter elephants with skirmishers, flaming projectiles, and traps. Within a generation, what had once seemed an unstoppable terror became merely another problem with a Roman solution. The same pattern repeated itself with the Samnites, the Carthaginians, the Macedonians, and countless tribes across Europe. From Hannibal's cavalry maneuvers to the guerrilla tactics of Iberian tribes, Rome encountered each challenge, suffered defeats, and adapted. Unlike their enemies, who often saw honor in repeating tradition, Rome saw wisdom in learning. Every loss became a textbook. Every foe, no matter how terrifying, became a teacher. This mindset transformed Rome from a small city on the Tiber into an empire that commanded 3 continents. Their adaptability extended beyond tactics into equipment as well. When they saw the value of Spanish swords, they adopted them into their arsenal, replacing the old stabbing spears with the deadly gladius. When they realized the effectiveness of the Gallic chainmail, they made it their own. They even borrowed naval innovations, such as the Greek trireme, but added their own twist, the infamous corvus, a boarding bridge that turned sea battles into infantry engagements, where Roman discipline gave them the edge. Rome's adaptability was not just clever imitation, it was transformation. They didn't simply copy, they improved and refined, creating something uniquely Roman out of everything they absorbed. This ability to learn faster than their enemies could innovate meant that Rome was rarely defeated in the same way twice. One of the defining innovations that made Rome's armies unstoppable was the Manipular Legion. To understand why it was so revolutionary, we need to look at what came before it. For centuries, Mediterranean warfare was dominated by the phalanx, a rigid wall of spears pioneered by the Greeks. In theory, it was a nearly unbreakable formation, but in practice it had a critical weakness: it was clumsy. Once the phalanx began moving, it was difficult to stop, and even harder to turn. If the ground was uneven, or if an enemy managed to outflank it, the entire formation collapsed like dominoes. Rome initially copied this style, but after hard, fought wars against the Samnites in the rugged hills of central Italy, they realized the phalanx was ill-suited for rough terrain. The Romans responded with something new, something flexible: the manipular system. Instead of one giant block of soldiers, the legion was broken into smaller units, called maniples, arranged in a checkerboard pattern. This formation gave Rome incredible versatility. Soldiers could advance in staggered waves, with fresh units moving up as others tired. Open spaces between maniples meant the legion could move across hills, forests, or broken ground without losing cohesion. The beauty of this system was that it combined flexibility with discipline. Light infantry known as velites skirmished in front, harassing the enemy with javelins before retreating. Behind them stood the hastati, younger and less experienced soldiers who would engage first. If they faltered, they could fall back through the gaps to be replaced by the princeps, seasoned veterans with stronger armor and weapons. Finally, at the rear stood the triarii, the hardened elite who acted as the final reserve. An old Roman saying captures their role: "It has come to the triarii," meaning the situation is desperate enough to call in the best. This layered system allowed Rome to wear down its enemies gradually, while keeping its most skilled warriors fresh until the decisive moment. It also ensured that the Roman army never relied on a single gamble. They could absorb losses, rotate units, and maintain cohesion even under crushing pressure. Compared to the brittle rigidity of the phalanx, the Manipular Legion was a living, breathing war machine. The Manipular system gave Rome a tactical edge for centuries. Against Hannibal, against the Hellenistic kingdoms, and against the wild tribal armies of Gaul and Britain, this flexible structure allowed them to adapt mid-battle. It was not just a formation. It was a philosophy of resilience, a recognition that war was about outlasting and outmaneuvering the enemy. What truly made the Roman army fearsome was not only its organization, but the discipline of its soldiers. To the Romans, war was not a seasonal activity or a noble pastime. It was a profession, one that demanded constant training, endurance, and obedience. A Roman soldier was not just a man with a sword. He was a cog in a vast, finely tuned machine. And that machine was drilled to perfection. Training in the legions was relentless. Soldiers marched incredible distances with full gear, sometimes up to 20 miles in a single day, not as a test, but as routine. They practiced with wooden swords heavier than their real weapons, so that when battle came, the steel felt light in their hands. Formations were rehearsed endlessly, so that even under the chaos of war, units moved as one body. To the enemy, it looked less like a mob of fighters and more like a single, unstoppable creature advancing with terrifying calm. Discipline was enforced with ruthless severity. A soldier who disobeyed orders could face execution. Entire units could be punished by decimation, the execution of every 10th man if they displayed cowardice or mutiny. This might seem brutal, but it forged an army where loyalty to the unit and obedience to command were matters of life and death. The individual mattered less than the whole, and this mentality allowed Rome to fight wars on a scale that would have broken other states. But discipline was not only about punishment, it was also about pride. Roman soldiers were bound together by shared hardship, common rituals, and the knowledge that their training made them superior to any foe. Their camps were marvels of organization, fortified with ditches and palisades, laid out in grids like miniature cities. Every soldier knew his place, every duty was assigned, and even at rest, the army never lost its order. This culture of discipline extended to equipment and logistics. Roman soldiers were equipped uniformly, ensuring cohesion on the battlefield. Supply lines were meticulously maintained, roads built to move armies swiftly across vast distances. No detail was too small for Roman organization, and no soldier was allowed to neglect his responsibilities. The result was that Rome's armies could fight longer, harder, and more effectively than nearly any opponent. Where others relied on bravery or individual heroics, Rome relied on collective strength, the unwavering discipline of men who had been hardened by endless drills and the constant expectation of obedience. Rome's military genius did not stop at the battlefield. Perhaps its most brilliant strategy lay in its ability to incorporate the very peoples it conquered. Unlike many empires that ruled through fear alone, Rome offered something revolutionary: inclusion. This did not mean equality, at least not at first, but it meant opportunity. Conquered peoples could become allies, partners, and eventually Romans themselves. This created a system where the defeated had something to gain by joining rather than resisting. In Italy, this took the form of the socii, allied communities bound by treaty to provide troops. These allies often fought side by side with Roman citizens, sharing in the glory and the spoils of victory. Over time, many were granted partial citizenship, and later, after the social war in the 1st century BCE, full citizenship was extended across the Italian peninsula. This was extraordinary for the ancient world. While the Greeks prided themselves on exclusive city-state citizenship, Rome spread its identity outward, weaving diverse peoples into its fabric. The benefits for Rome were immense. By tapping into the manpower of its allies, Rome fielded armies far larger than its own citizen base could support. In the Punic Wars against Carthage, this alliance system was crucial. Even after catastrophic defeats, like the slaughter at Cannae, Rome could draw upon a vast network of allies to replenish its legions. Hannibal, despite his genius, found himself isolated in Italy because so many of Rome's allies remained loyal, bound not only by fear, but also by the promise of Rome's eventual rewards. This inclusivity extended beyond Italy as Rome expanded. Local elites in Spain, Gaul, and the East were often opted into Roman administration. They were given positions, honors, and sometimes citizenship, creating a powerful incentive for cooperation. Instead of ruling as distant overlords, Rome embedded itself into the social and political structures of the conquered. Even the army reflected this approach. Auxiliary units, made up of non-citizens, fought alongside legions, bringing specialized skills. Archers from the east, cavalry from Gaul, slingers from the Balearics. In return, after years of service, these auxiliaries could earn citizenship for themselves and their families. This turned foreigners into Romans through the very act of defending Rome. The genius of this system was that it turned conquest into integration. Rome did not simply expand its borders, it expanded what it meant to be Roman. Every new war brought not just new lands, but new peoples woven into the empire's strength. This inclusivity ensured that Rome's armies were constantly replenished, not only by Romans, but by those who had once been their enemies. If one strategy above all else defined Rome's path to dominance, it was persistence. Rome did not give up. To be Roman was to believe that no defeat was final, that no enemy was unconquerable, and that time itself was a weapon. Other states might collapse after a single disastrous loss. Rome absorbed it, endured it, and returned stronger. This relentlessness was perhaps the most terrifying quality Rome ever displayed. The perfect example is the Second Punic War, when Hannibal crushed the Romans at Cannae in 216 BCE, killing tens of thousands in one of the greatest tactical victories in history. Most nations would have sued for peace, but Rome did not surrender. Instead, they raised new armies, fortified their cities, and wore Hannibal down with a strategy of attrition. For nearly 2 decades, they bled, endured, and refused to yield. Finally, under Scipio Africanus, they struck at Carthage itself, forcing Hannibal to return home and sealing Rome's supremacy. The message was clear: you could defeat Rome in battle, but you could never break its will. This persistence was tied to a ruthless practicality. Rome did not hesitate to annihilate enemies who threatened its survival. The destruction of Carthage in 146 BCE, where the city was razed to the ground and its population enslaved, showed the world what awaited those who challenged Rome too often. The same fate befell Corinth, the proud Greek city that defied Roman power. Mercy was sometimes offered, but when Rome decided on destruction, it was absolute. Rome's long-game strategy was not limited to military campaigns. Their infrastructure reflected the same philosophy. Roads, aqueducts, and fortifications were built not for immediate gain, but for centuries of use. Their colonies and settlements were planted like seeds, spreading Roman culture, language, and law deep into conquered territories. Even if a region rebelled, Rome could outweight them, relying on the slow, steady spread of its systems to erode resistance over generations. At its core, Rome's persistence was rooted in its collective identity. Unlike kingdoms tied to the fate of a single ruler, Rome's republic, and later its empire, was greater than any individual. Leaders rose and fell, but Rome endured. Its citizens believed in the inevitability of Roman victory, and that belief fueled their willingness to fight, rebuild, and return to war no matter the cost. So what was the strategy that made Rome unstoppable? It wasn't a single battle plan or a clever trick. It was a mindset. Rome adapted faster than anyone else. They built an army that could move and shift like no other. They drilled their soldiers into an iron machine of discipline. And above all, they brought the conquered into their fold, turning foes into Romans and making their empire a living, growing organism. This combination created something terrifying and awe-inspiring, a power that could lose battles, but never the war. You could defeat a Roman army, but you could not defeat Rome. That persistence, that refusal to ever truly fall, was what set them apart from every empire in history. If you found this journey into Rome's secret strategy fascinating, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories from the ancient world. And let me know in the comments, if you had lived back then, would you have wanted to fight for Rome or against it?